We are, yeah, we're here. It's a little early. We're not going to get started yet with the content, but I just wanted to say hi and see how everybody's doing. Make sure you can all see us. So if you are here and can see and hear us, please just drop something in the chat box, say hello. So let me just go through a little bit about how Crowdcast works while we're waiting here. Oh, hey guys. Oh, there's a bunch of people. Awesome. So Karen, Virginia, and Josh, and Jen, Maria, Varden, JP.
Josh is actually coming from inside my house. It's even more intense.
It's like a horror movie.
Yeah, he's streaming live from downstairs.
Derek and Amy. Hi, Amy. Michael and Matthew, lots and lots of people here. Awesome. So while we're sort of getting going here, if you guys want to talk a little bit in the chat about your own, like what work you do. I'm assuming a lot of people are going to show up today are cartoonists just because we're both cartoonists, but of course lots of people who are in my community are also not cartoonists. And so these kinds of issues that we're talking about definitely apply to everybody in all creative fields. You know, if you're a writer or you're a filmmaker or whatever, like all the things we're going to talk about totally apply, unless we start talking about nibs, in which case it doesn't, but everything else. So what's your work? And
top 10 nibs.
Yeah, and I've also put a really fun little poll under the screen here that everybody can answer. So let me go through Crowdcast for just a second while we get ready to go here. So basically there's a chat over here. Everybody's, I think, discovered that already. And then the important thing is there's also a big red button down below us here that says ask a question or suggest a topic. A lot of people have found that already, but I noticed that some people had put questions into the chat, and as you can see, it goes really quickly, and so we're not going to be able to pay attention to that fully while we're talking, and we may miss questions. So if you put them down below, that would be the best place for them. And also you can upvote, and you can also comment on questions. So you can, if you think a question is really relevant, somebody already asked your question, just upvote it, and you can also add a comment in terms of, you know, trying to make it, you know, to home in on whatever the thing is that you're interested in about that question. One other thing, ask you guys a favor here, which is that there is right under, I think probably right down here under me, there's a button that says share. And so if everybody could just take a minute right now and share this event, just share it to your own audience. That would be really great and really help us out. You know, so on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you'd like to be, we'll practice what we preach here and talk about sharing cool things with your community and how that helps your community grow. So that would be really hot and really awesome if you guys would do that. Yeah, hot. I don't know why I said that. I never say that.
Yeah. I like it.
Let's see, was there anything else? Oh, one other thing is I'm thinking about doing more events like this in the next few months, doing more interviews and so on and discussions. So if you want to make sure that you find out about those things, and most of you guys will get email about them, but you can also follow me on Crowdcast. And I believe that's up above the window up here somewhere, probably something like that. Let's see, got another minute to get started. I will get my slides up and we will get started in just a sec here. Oh, one other thing is
frantically sharing this last minute.
My assistant Jen is here in the chat, and so if you have any technical problems, ask in the chat and she should be able to help you. Jen, do you want to say hi over there? And occasionally what happens with Crowdcast, if you're on like a slower connection, is it'll like hang up and you'll lose, there she is, Jen. If you lose the video feed or something like that, you can just restart your browser and come right back where you were. Just as this one link, unlike a lot of video platforms, the same link works for everything. And so you could just come back to this to just come back in if you have to close the browser or walk away or something happens or your computer dies or whatever it is. And also, if you want to watch this again in the future and watch the replay, you can also come back. Oh, and I forgot to say, we are also live on Facebook. So hi, anybody who's watching us on Facebook.
Oh, maybe I shouldn't have posted to Facebook saying they should come to
no,
Crowdcast. This is so complicated.
If they come to Crowdcast, though, they can actually participate because we're not looking at Facebook right now. So if you're on Facebook and you want to ask questions or be in the chat, come on over to Crowdcast and join us here. Otherwise, enjoy us on Facebook. And we're going to get started because it is now 9:00 p.m. where I am because I'm in France. And it's noon where you are, is it not, Lucy?
It is. That is correct. Bang on afternoon time. And I'm very grateful that I have AC. Otherwise, I would be doing a hotbox sauna Crowdcast experience because it gets very warm up here.
Sometimes you got to love the internet, though, right? Welcome everybody to Demons and Monsters with Lucy Bellwood and Jessica Abel. And we are going to be talking today about self-doubt and how we struggle with that and how everyone we know struggles with that. And then also how that can be kind of fuel in some sense, or even like a good sign when you're talking about like, why does self-doubt come up and why do we struggle with it? So we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about crowdfunding. We're talking about social media, lots of cool stuff. And
somehow we're gonna do it in
we're totally gonna do it in an hour. So Lucy, so this was my social media art. This is Lucy's, which was way cooler. So making those back.
I just got excited because you have all these cool drawings of yourself, and it's fun to do events with other cartoonists where you can be like, look, pictures of her, pictures of me. We both draw ourselves. Very
cool.
It's fun.
This is just my brief intro to Lucy. So Lucy Bellwood, I first came across my radar when I don't remember if it was actually a share on Facebook or on Twitter or something like that, but it was somewhere. And I came across this really cool talk she had done for the animation workshop in Denmark. And it's a talk that is about how her career got built basically on almost accidentally via being awesome on social media and how that fed into doing Kickstarters, and then that sort of the Kickstarters then fed into the social media, and then all the other stuff came together sort of around that. And I'm sure there's a lot more details to it, but I was really impressed. And I was also like, oh crap, she's like 12 and I don't know what I'm doing here. And why is she so much better at this than I am? And all those should monster things that one thinks. This is her really awesome old Kickstarter that was, when was this? In 20?
This was 2 years ago. This was actually my second Kickstarter. My very old Kickstarter was in 2012, which was like the nascent baby days of Kickstarter. And that was the thing that pushed me on to doing full-time freelance right out of college. I finished the campaign the morning that I graduated, and there was a lot of lessons learned there. But Baggy Wrinkles was like my first grown-up cartoonist Kickstarter. And so now it seems like I do a campaign, I guess, every other year. That's exhausting to think about, but maybe it'll be longer as time moves forward, or maybe I'm going to work more traditionally with a publisher. But it seems like 2 to 3 years has been kind of my hit rate for when I share stuff on crowdfunding.
Yeah. So far that seems like that seems like a good rate. But the reason I said old Kickstarter, of course, is because there's one going on right now, which I totally want to hear about.
There sure is. Has to do with this guy.
I know. And it all comes around and goes around in circles on this particular discussion. But I really want to hear about what's going on with that on the backside, like what that feels like and what's been going on.
Yeah.
But so this is the second thing I saw of Lucy, and then she's doing an awesome talk at XO, and I was super envious that she had this great video and all that other stuff. I bring up all this.
Yeah, bless them for doing that, because having the video of that is so vital. Like, I think a lot of people have discovered my work. I mean, even the one at the animation workshop, that was just because one of my co-teachers had a camera. And I said, oh, Sam, would you record this? I feel like I've actually kind of codified some ideas in this talk that might be helpful. So I was really delighted when you said that you'd found my work through that talk, because it felt like it was really worth something to distill. I'd been teaching there for 2 weeks at that point, and it was kind of an opportunity to distill this class that I'd never taught before, that I was trying to figure out about. It was ostensibly about webcomics, and instead I was like, comics and the internet and you and crowdfunding and social media and also everything. Right. So they were very kind to let me record that and post it.
Well, I mean, it was your talk, but it was, I mean, I'm sure it helped them too to like spread the word about the animation workshop, which is an amazing program.
It is such a good program.
There, a few weeks, like a couple months ago, there in May for the very last Anyway, there's a great program. This is a program in Denmark for, it's a 4-year program training cartoonists. And anybody, it's in English, even though it's in Denmark. So anybody who is unbelievably serious about becoming a cartoonist at the highest level should apply to the animation workshop. Anyway, so saw this thing, and I think that the video is really crucial. It's really important, and it really establishes authority in a really interesting and powerful way. So when I, it's premature there, that slide. When I met Lucy in person, it was totally by chance. It was at the, at MoCA, right? New York. Yeah,
MoCA.
Which is a comics festival, for anybody who doesn't know. It's a small press comics festival, and she was there as a guest of Patreon. And so,
right, which like MoCA's a show that I never would have gone to if Patreon hadn't contacted me and said, hey, we have an opportunity to sponsor some people, because I couldn't have been able to afford to go, right? Like it's a cross-country show, small press, like I wasn't sure that I'd be able to compensate flights and accommodation in New York. So if it weren't for them, I wouldn't have even been there in the first place. And again, more chance stuff to do with social media.
Well, not chance. I think not chance. I think that, yes, obviously.
The mix of good fortune and like that thing, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Exactly. Like you had set yourself up for success in that way. But so she was there and we talked, and then I was turning over the idea in my head of inviting her to do an event with me. And then when I called her to see if she wanted to do it, she told me she was getting ready to do this new Kickstarter, which this is a screenshot from ages ago. It's now way better than that. Way, way better than that.
Yeah, that was way at the start. That was day 2 of the campaign,
like,
which like, holy.
Yeah, this is you killing your goal in like 18 hours.
Yeah, just crush it right out of the gate.
Totally, which I was just like, you know, go, Lucy, that's so awesome. So how much longer is there on this, and where are you at now?
So the campaign is just now, we've got about 6 days to go. It's astonishing. This is maybe the first time I've closed the tab with my Kickstarter in it since it launched. We just cleared $41,000. We're about 50 people shy of 1,000 backers, which is just unreal. It's really thrilling. I never thought I'd be able to get 1,000 people to throw their weight behind anything that I did. And that's the Kevin Kelly thing, right? As I talk about this often, that when I was starting out, not even as a cartoonist, just like thinking about working in comics, I read that Kevin Kelly 100 True Fans, or 1,000 True Fans essay, which the basic premise of which is you don't have to be Beyonce to make it as a creative, independent person. It doesn't take as many people as you think. And if you have a true fan, somebody who will buy whatever it is that you put out, you don't actually need that many of those people to make a sustainable living as a creator, which is, I think, a really valuable notion. Ironically, I didn't realize that he had posted a follow-up essay to that a couple months later where he'd said, you know, I thought this would work, and then I did the research and crunched the numbers, and it turns out this isn't working for anybody. But I think he was writing that at a time when Patreon and Kickstarter were not as ubiquitous as they are now. They hadn't come out yet. And it's now I think that is very true. I feel like reliably having 500 to 1,000 people who I can tap to say, hey, admittedly, this is once every 2 years, right? 2 to 3 years. You don't want to be asking for that every month. And the number of people who support me on Patreon, who I would argue are like the true fans, is much smaller. That's about just shy of 300 people right now. But that still allows me to pay my bills. So like there's a
I mean, I think that there's something. I've read that article too, and I've also read the rebuttal and rebuttal, and I basically fall on the medium skeptical end of this, because I think that the basic notion that you can get by with a lot less than you think, you don't have to be mega famous, is true, but you have to be very careful about your business model if you're going to get by, and also your expenses. You're going to get by.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, 1,000 true fans or whatever. And also, as you're saying, like you ask these people who are your true fan. I mean, the idea of the true fan, this is something from the article, true fan is not somebody who goes and buys your book. True fan is somebody who buys your book and your plushie and your special event.
Right, your t-shirt, the mug, the hat. They'll drive 2 hours to do a signing
for your coaching and wants to have lunch with you. You know, that's your true fan. If you get 1,000 of those, you have probably 50,000 people who will buy your book. You know, so it's really like,
which is
right,
massive.
it's massive, and it's not it's not quite reflective of what we think of, I think. And that, and all that said, I think this is something, and I sort of expected to get into this later, but I just want to ask you about this. You know, I noticed with this Kickstarter that your budget for the Kickstarter initially was like just production and shipping, essentially.
Yes.
And then you're like production and shipping and taxes, which I'm sure you're not in the 30% tax bracket, but still, you know, like.
No, Oregon is terrible.
Okay.
Oregon is legitimately terrible for freelancers. We don't have sales tax, so it's rough if you're indie.
Anyway.
But a lot of these expenses are deductible. Anyway, you can finish your question.
The point is, you're not paying yourself. You know, like you know, with this particular, and you are now, because you're, you know, you'll be able to make some actual profit on this that you can take home because you've beat your goals. But then, and I know, of course, afterwards you have this stock of books and plushies and all the stuff you can sell. But it's not a foregone conclusion that those things, you know, like this pace of when you sell those things and so on. So how do you think about that, you know, that issue?
So the way that I conceptualized it for this campaign, first of all, there are a couple things. Personally, my very first campaign, the funding goal was $1,200, which I thought was so much money because I was a broke college student and did not come from an environment where I had a lot of cash. And it was like, oh, this is a lot of money. I don't know that I would be comfortable asking people for this much, but I want to print some comics. And the campaign overfunded to about $12,000, which was staggering for me as a college senior. And that was the thing that pushed me into freelancing. But that campaign, I did not factor in shipping costs. I didn't factor in taxes. I didn't, you know, it's a really good thing that I overfunded, because even though I did have money left over, it was crucial for me to have that cushion. And what really stuck out to me from that campaign was that people like a winner. People like supporting something that feels like a success. And we've all had friends, at least I think most creators have, who run Kickstarters that have really big goals, and maybe they get like 80% of the way there and they're just like really cramming to get that last, you know, 20% down to the wire, and it's really stressful. And or you support a really big campaign and you give them $20, but their goal is $500,000, and like you can't really see the impact of that. And I think just going back to the notion of the true fans, like cultivating individual relationships rather than growing your numbers. I saw somebody asked either in the chat window or in the question bar, like, is there any way to speed up the process of building a following? And I feel like for me personally, my ethos relies far more on quality over quantity, that I really want to make sure, like the number on my Instagram page or the number on my Twitter follower page, like that doesn't matter to me as much as the kinds of relationships I'm able to develop with those people and the connections I can develop with them, not from a like, so I can milk them for all they're worth kind of perspective, but from a like, my work feels most successful when it's connecting me to other people. So this is a roundabout way of saying, when I was planning my second Kickstarter, I still didn't factor in paying myself, because there's kind of an unspoken issue with that on Kickstarter. I think a lot of the time campaigns are structured to be just for manufacturing costs. And that is decent for something that's like a tech gadget that people have developed. Although even there, you've got time sunk into development, prototyping, like all that kind of stuff. And in the case of a comic, right, I'd been drawing the current story that I'm serializing in this book, 100 Demon Dialogues. I'd been doing an entry every day, every single day for the last 100 days. So that's 100 days averaging, I would say probably an hour and a half per entry, maybe an hour per entry. So already that's a lot of billable hours, right? If you're a freelancer. And the reason that I didn't include that, and the reason that I didn't include taxes in my initial estimate, was that plushies cost a lot to make. You'll notice that I've got this creature hanging into the side of my stream. This is the prototype for the plush doll that I'm producing for the project. He's great. I love him. And they're a lot more expensive to make than books. So I realized that my goal was going to be quite a bit higher than I had hoped. And quite a bit higher still only means 25K, but I really wanted to get it down to 20, because personally, I like backing campaigns where I feel like $20 is really going to make a difference for somebody in reaching their goal. And that's just personal preference. And I will be the first to admit that because my previous campaign had overfunded, I felt fairly confident that this one would do the same. And I think it's difficult to talk about this from a strategizing perspective, because it's not something I would necessarily recommend to somebody if they're running their first Kickstarter. You should be paid for your time. Absolutely. Well, the challenge is that like
you got to get it funded, right? So like that's the balance.
Yeah, but you've got to get it funded, right? Kickstarter's all or nothing. And the fact is, my first campaign, I thought like, oh, well, I hit my goal in like 3 hours. Nobody's going to want to give me money now because we did it. We're there. And therefore, I was very confused when over the next 3 weeks, I continued to receive money from people for an exceptionally long period of time. And it was very confusing and awesome and great. And that stuck with me. And so I think rather than doing a lot of stretch goals this time around, which I did for my last Kickstarter, I just said right off the bat, like, I'm going to put all the bells and whistles into this book. I'm not going to say like, oh, at 40,000, we're going to do French flaps. At 50,000, we're going to do whatever. It was like, no, this is what I want to make. And you guys know me, you know that I have a track record with this. Let's make it happen. And my hope was, and I'm very fortunate that this is borne out, that we would hit the funding goal, which we did in just over a day. And then the money that came in afterwards would account for a tax cushion, which I did try to be transparent about. I'm a big fan of sharing my finances transparently. I did a big series of posts on Patreon earlier this year where I basically broke down my income and expenses for all of 2016 and then also for all the years that I've been a full-time freelancer. I think it's a subject that is really hard for people to talk about. And I also think that it's incredibly helpful to be transparent about it because it doesn't look the same for any two people. And I think the worst thing that happens is that someone feels a little less alone about struggling with their own finances. And those of you who haven't seen my XOXO talk, that is basically the gist of it, was talking about how I had a very successful year with this Kickstarter and this new book and getting an agent and all this stuff. And I was still on food stamps and not making a ton of money. And I was really scared to talk about that because I thought people would say like, well, that's because you're a bad business person. And likewise with the Kickstarter, I had people say like, well, hang on, you're not paying yourself. That's not being a very good freelancer. And there are strategic reasons for why I didn't factor that in.
I mean, it's kind of like a lot.
The really exciting,
sense, right? Because this is a thing that really gets a lot of attention, and then people are still going to want to buy the book and thing afterwards, and it increases your whole kind of profile.
And if I'm able to sell the remainder of the books and the plushies, you know, absolutely, as you point out, that is income, potential income that's locked up in merchandise. But I do also pay taxes on that stock, and I have to pay to warehouse it and like ship it. So there are costs and minuses. And have I mentioned that being an independent creator is running a business? Because it really is running.
It's totally running a business. It's absolutely right.
It's a lot of work. I was going to say one other thing, which is that the really exciting thing about overfunding the Kickstarter is that I've been doing the back of envelope math, and theoretically, with the remainder of the money that is coming out of this, and something to keep in mind is that I also run a Patreon page. So in some ways, Patreon pays me about $12,000 a year, which is not a living person's middle-class salary for sure, but it is money that allows me to pay my rent and, you know, not worry about being out on the street each month. And that means that I am getting paid for my work. Like Patreon has been paying me for the 100-day project while it's been going on. And that is what has allowed me to focus on that kind of personal work rather than just doing other freelance stuff for other people. And the net profit on the Kickstarter, which may not be as much as it looks like from the front page, because, you know, more backers means more shipping, more fulfillment, like the expenses will go up. But even with all of that said, I think I'm going to have enough money to actually pay myself a salary for the first time ever, which is really exciting. So the hope is that I would be able to meet that out over the next 12 months and give myself $2,000 a month to actually live on, which is great because I would love to work on a graphic novel, and it's hard to do personal long-term creative work and also freelance at the same time.
Yeah.
I've been talking a long time. I'm going to shut up now.
All right.
Very long answer to a very short question.
No, it was a very complex question, actually. I'm glad you went into detail there. So I'm going to go back to my slides for a few minutes here. And so here's some of what Lucy might have known about me, just so you know who I am, those of you who are coming from Lucy's side. So I'm a cartoonist, and I didn't put any of my comics on here particularly, but I also did 2 textbooks about how to make comics, and I know that you found those. And then I also have I have a book called Out on the Wire, Storytelling Secrets of the New Masters of Radio, which is about how the best narrative audio people construct stories. And I made a podcast out of that called Out on the Wire. And I know that Lucy, you found me through that, right? Initially, something like that.
Sorry, I muted my microphone. So I actually found Drawing Words and Writing Pictures back when I was first getting into drawing comics and was feeling kind of hungry for a more robust craft-oriented approach to making comics and storytelling. Like I did a workshop at the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont, which is a graduate program for comics people. And I did a little 5-day summer workshop there and got totally hooked on wanting more information about nibs and like Ames guides and lettering tools and, you know, all these things that you see on the cover of Mastering Comics. So I got a copy of Drawing Words and Writing Pictures for Christmas, probably in 2010, or maybe for my birthday, and just pored over it for hours. It was a real formative text for me and gave me a lot of comfort, even if I didn't like pursue the forum and the exercises and doing stuff in community online. It just gave me this window into, this is something that people
and that's actually
I could do and get better at.
Point that you make about like forum, and there's like exercises online and things, but we did this book came out in 2008, and we were really like, we wanted to do stuff online with it, but kind of didn't really. I mean, we have a Facebook page for it, and we had a Twitter feed. We got rid of it years ago because we weren't really using it, but it's I mean, it sort of gets back to this, like, I think that what I really liked about your talk at the animation workshop, and then what I've seen since then, is like, I know you didn't do it intentionally. You weren't like setting out like, here's my mission, you know, it's like looking back on it. But my journey with using social media and just community building, like email lists and just mail lists, because I used to have like an actual on paper mailing list in the 90s, and I would send out postcards when I had a new comic, and I had people and then I had my first website. I had people could join the Art Babe Army, and, you know, like be a part of my thing, and I would send them emails sometimes. This was before you even had like an email server, you know what I mean? I would send them mail. Oh, the old days. But so that there's this kind of like randomness to sort of like taking stabs at different ways to handle this stuff. And one of the things I wanted to talk about as we go along a little bit here, maybe not just yet, but in a minute, is a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed by social media. How do I handle that? And I think that basically when I've been really overwhelmed by it is when I have no strategy around it at all. And like what I think I see you having initially unconsciously, but at this point more consciously, is a strategy around that. So Out on the Wire was a strategy for me. Doing the podcast was a way to try to bring attention to the book and to the work in general. And that did have an online group. It still exists. The online group still exists, but it was a series. It wasn't an ongoing podcast. And so during the series, there were these creative challenges, and people would post about them. And there was this like really strong conversation going on there. And in a lot of ways, that group became the sort of heart of what then became my work with the Creative Focus.
Growing Gills, right?
Growing Gills later, and Creative Focus Workshop. So this is my current main thing that I'm doing, is writing and working on the subject of creative focus. I'm making room in complicated lives for big creative projects. Just what you're talking about, like you're a freelancer, how do you fit in a graphic novel, that kind of thing. And Growing Gills is my new book about that. And then my social media at this point, my use of social media is, you know, I am also overwhelmed by this, you guys. Like, this definitely can be overwhelming, but like,
same.
And I mean, you have to make real choices about it and decide what you're going to do. And I'm kind of in a moment where I'm thinking about like rejiggering how I do things, because what I've been doing over the last year or so is using a lot of automation and basically posting content to various streams, and then not engaging that much because I just don't have the time for it. And my engaging happens via live things like this, and it happens on my email list and in the workshop, like in the Creative Focus workshop. But it's like making those,
which again is an argument for like, you are narrowing down your quality over quantity and saying like, I want to have 5 people in a workshop and really go in deep with them and figure out what's going on in their creative lives, versus like having a video snippet that ends up on 50,000 people's news feeds.
Right. And I think that,
and it's not to say that both don't have a place, but like there is a benefit to that. I think it's developing those individual relationships, especially because there are people in the chat, it looks like, who have taken your workshop.
Yes, there are. There's some some of my true fans are there. And it's really great to see them. You know, I recognize them, you know, like, you know, right away, like their names are super familiar to me. And like, we've had this
People are always surprised like that if I ask someone, if I meet them at a show and they say, oh, I follow you on Twitter, I follow you on Instagram, and I ask them what their handle is and they look embarrassed and say like, oh, it's, whatever, Fluffer 264. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're a person. And they confused because they don't ever like comment on my stuff maybe, or they don't engage. But like if somebody likes every single thing that I put on the internet, I notice, I pay attention, I watch. I don't see the absence, right? If someone doesn't, I'm not sitting there like, nobody faved this week, or you're off the list now because you didn't like do it. But if people do, if you see that name over and over again in your feed, you feel really, it's warm and fuzzy and it makes me feel good. And so that creates this connection in my brain that's like a parasocial relationship with the people who are supporting me, whereas they're having a parasocial relationship with me as a person on the internet who's like living their life in the spotlight. And
yeah, no,
I'm thinking a lot about those.
I think recently. The thing that I mean, it's Shayla is one of my true fans for sure. She likes everything I do. So thank you.
Yes. But that was what was really exciting about getting to do this, was that listening to Out on the Wire, which kind of reintroduced me to your work individually, I loved it because it was so honest about the fact that you hadn't made a podcast before. You were like, well, look, I have all this tape, and the thing that always stuck out to me was you interviewing Glenn Washington over Chinese food, right? And he's like talking in this noisy restaurant with his mouth full of chicken feet, and like every single moment in the interview, you were like, don't do this. Never buy your people food. Don't bribe them with stuff. Don't record in a crowded public space. In fact, don't do anything I just did. But anyway, here's this great conversation with Glenn Washington, who I love. So it was, the show was delightful, but it was also refreshingly honest, and listening to it, again, that parasocial thing, like especially with podcasts, a good podcast to me feels like you are getting to sit down and chat with a friend once a week. And it was this particular blend of like honesty and I don't really know what I'm doing, mixed with I kind of do know what I'm doing because I'm Jessica Abel and I've been doing this a while, and like I have some thoughts and things to pass on. And it was a show that I listened to and thought, man, I bet we would get along if we ever had the chance to.
And here we are.
So when you proposed this, I was really excited. He was like, yes, this is the time. We'll prove that
totally.
This is, synergy.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's that vulnerability that you identified in the podcast is something that you were basically expressing through your demons drawings. This feeling of like, can I really do this? Am I really up to it? So let's move on to that part. I have more slides. I told you I'd do
more slides. Slides that I didn't have to make. This is the best.
So this is the first demon drawing that I saw of yours, and I was like, oh, she's doing the thing I'm doing. Oh my God.
Yeah, that one blew up. That was one of the most popular entries from last year's project.
Well, because obviously, it's so obvious why, because it's like what I've figured out just from working with all these different people in the workshop and like writing and the responses I get to my blog posts and stuff is like, this is such a huge thing, the inner critic and all that stuff. So, and you even use the word should in the thing, which I was like,
Yeah, because yours is called the should monster, right? And
so that actually came from this, which is,
I love this one.
Yeah. Oh and what I love about it is look favorite. Carefully at this. I don't know if you can see this in the slide on the screen, you guys, but if you look carefully, you can see this is drawn on like the torn corner of a piece of paper with like courier typed on the back of it. It's got to be about 1.5 inches tall. It's tiny, and she drew this tiny little guy. Sarah Lovett, cartoonist Sarah Lovett, drew this tiny little guy, and it says, "Your work is shit." And she posted it above her desk.
Like, what is he, an elephant mouse?
I know, it's like sort of weird and disgusting.
Weird bandit masked elephant mouse. I love it.
And when we were talking about this idea, I had a post that in a sort of exercise that I created for my blog, and then we did this thing and this was the very first pilot version of what became the Creative Focus Workshop. She shared this thing and she's like, here's the thing I do. And I was like, oh, the should monster. And then since then I've had all these other students do them, and a bunch of people gave me permission to share them, which was nice. So this is Chad Benke's, and Chad was on my student roundtable from the Creative Focus Workshop, which is also on my Crowdcast if anyone wants to go and see it. Really awesome stuff. So was Michi. Michi's here. Michi Matthias is here. So these guys were in that group, and you can see that they're, some people are, Chad's a designer, he's not a cartoonist. Ed is a cartoonist, and you can see the difference there. Jim's obviously a cartoonist, and you can see also people like expressing like what is the nature of their particular should monster, and that's what I really like about this.
Yeah, and they change, right? But everybody has the one that's like the burning individual. Like I think it changes. Certainly, I found over 100 days that the shape of the demon, even though he looks the same, you know, more or less every day, like the things that he was harping about changed, but there were some commonalities. There were some themes there for sure.
And sometimes he's cute, and sometimes he's horrible. You know, like there's elements of both. So this is Lena's was her second grade teacher.
Oh, I was wondering about that. Yeah, it looked. I either was like, oh, this is the evil teacher version of her, or something else. I'm also going to grab. I was just grabbing the link to my friend Sarah Aris, who did an amazing series during Inktober last year. There we go. Those are all on Live Journal, Blast from the Past. And yeah, she did a really great series of kind of dual demons, saying like, dress nicely to make a good impression, but not too nicely, that's intimidating, like this kind of push-pull experience. And she did a whole set of them for Inktober that are great. So I just put the
I'll definitely check those out.
Yeah,
I thought Michelle's was great. She actually took like several extra weeks to do this because it was so hard for her to draw this.
Oh,
you know,
wow.
like these are the people, like all the people in her life who she feels are judging her, and some of them have their back turned on her, and you know, they're like very.
Oh, the one that's crossed out too.
Yeah,
oh.
I don't even know what that is, but you know, some of these are just really, you know, heart-wrenching. This one I love.
Yeah.
This is super hilarious. This is my student at PAFA where I teach, and do you see what it is?
Yes. I also really love these like shapely gams down the bottom. Just like really, the Should Monster works out. The Should Monster does squats.
Totally, absolutely. And this is Susan Oldings. I should have put this earlier on. This was the other person who really like knocked it out of the park, that first pilot. And she's a writer, and so she kind of wrote this piece. And basically, I've been telling people they should draw it even if they don't feel like they can draw. But some people, it's just they don't want to, and it's too hard, and that feels like a big should too. And so this was just from my very last cohort of this Creative Focus Workshop, and Jen Pinkowski is a writer also. And she was like, you know, this feeling, she just found this on the internet. She just found a photo, and I was like, this is what so from now on, this is what I'm going to do, is I'm going to change this assignment so that it's more open for people who feel like the shoulds are not, you know, that they can't express what they want to express when they're drawing, you know.
Yeah, totally. And I put out a call for people to send me their, I'm echoey a little bit. I put out a call for people to send me their demons while I was running the Kickstarter, and some of the folks who got back to me really talked about what a struggle it was even to draw something that is designed to be a depiction of a bad thing. You know, like you want even your demon to be perfect. And all of this has a lot to do with a writing mentor that I had when I was growing up. Her name is Deb Norton, and she has a book out now called Part Wild, Harnessing the Creative Power of Resistance, which is geared towards writers, but also has a lot of great information, I think, for creators of all stripes. And she would always talk about deliberately going for shitty, like trying to make deliberately awful work. And she just posted something the other day that rather than saying, like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you do if you knew you couldn't succeed?
Right.
Which I think is a much better way of thinking about it. Like, what if you have a monster in your head that says it has to be perfect? Oh God, it's going to be bad. Can you slyly look at that guy and say, oh yeah, you want to see bad? I'll show you bad. I'm going to make the worst drawing you've ever seen. Watch me. Blah, blah, blah. And there was a demon I did of that in the series where I drew left-handed because I saw myself getting really like perfectionist about having it be ideal. And I love seeing how much of Deb's influence and her work ended up in that process for me, because it really influenced the way that I thought about like talking back to that voice, or you know,
what I wanted to try
trying
with
to
Kathleen
overgo.
Years. This is something she'd actually drawn in the past. This is also from the latest cohort, and she's apparently been drawing her should monster over and over again for years, and she does it. And so I was thinking about that a lot when I was thinking about your series. And she says that it's been really, really helpful for her. And this is something I just want to say to everybody in the group here, everybody who's, you know, here listening to this. I really encourage you to draw or write or whatever, personify this beast, because I think what that does, at least for me, what I understand about that is that there's this way in which if you can kind of put all those feelings into a box and say that belongs to this creature, doesn't belong to me. It's not mine.
Right, this guy.
Right.
Like this, having an external cuddly version of your anxiety and self-doubt, highly recommend. A+, should definitely do for everyone.
Yeah, should definitely.
Because you can just say like, this is not, and that line in the barbed wire tree saying like, I wonder how I could grow if this were not here. I think about that all the time. And I think we all do. Like, I wonder what I could be accomplishing if I didn't have a day job, if I wasn't always short on time, if I wasn't always stressed, if I wasn't always sick, if I wasn't whatever.
But there's also the sense of like, there's a fantasy that goes into that thinking like, there's going to be some time or when place in which things are all going to be fine. And it's all, you know,
when I am not busy,
when I'm not busy, when I'm not whatever.
Yeah.
So we have so many things to get through here. We can do this for 4 hours. Anyway, we're gonna do it for an hour. So we're gonna keep moving here. So this is one of the things that I was doing as I was looking at all your demons. I was like wanting to pair them up and do stuff with them. So I put a couple of them in pairs like this.
I'm excited.
Yeah, and I didn't do that many because I was like, I got to stop with the slides. But so this, if anybody can't read this, it says a real artist never runs out of ideas, and it must be so nice, this other dimension you inhabit. And then in panel 20, it says they're all so amazing. There's no way we belong here. And I hate to break it to you, but we absolutely do. Now, I want to ask you a question about panel 20 there.
Yeah.
How much did you truly believe that when you wrote that?
So much.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. So all of these entries were drawn on specific days, right? Mm-hmm. And I went back and forth about this because I think there's a lot of power in this idea, and I think it could be structured really strongly as like a workbook or an ongoing narrative book. And I was torn, like, should I make a book out of all of these? Are people going to care if they don't have the backstory of what was going on with me on a given day? Or like, should I write an essay to go with each demon in the book so that people can also like hear a little bit of context? But that specific day on day 20, I was in Alaska at a comics camp with a bunch of amazing creators. Marina Telgemeier was there, and Ben Hackey, and Kazuki Buishi, and Jason Caffo, and Katie Shanahan, and Ryan North, and Kate Beaton, and Vera Brosgol. Like, this insane batch of people, right, who were all humans who I had seen when I was getting into comics and thought, like, wow, this is the creme de la creme, like, inspirational class of people who I would one day like to emulate in my own work. And I got to go to comics camp last year, and I was also doing a 100-day project back then, but it was not it's a different premise than this one. I was drawing an object a day. And while I was there last year, I had this realization that I had managed to get into this camp, and I was there with all these people that I had admired for ages and was finally getting the chance to befriend. And a lot of them I was actually already friends with through professional development, or, you know, just like having been in comics for 5 or 6 or 7 years at that point, 6 years. And I had this real, like, heart-stoppingly weepy moment of thinking, like, I think I made it. And that's not a static position, but it felt like when I was starting out in comics, I saw this train leaving the station with all these people on it who were all like maybe 6 years older than I was. And I ran like hell for 6 years. And I had just managed to like latch my hand onto the back rail of the back caboose train car and was being like dragged along behind this train, like, let me with you, I want to come too. And I felt like I not only had weaseled my way into this, it didn't feel dishonest. It felt like I had earned a place at that table, and I was still developing. I wasn't thinking like, oh yeah, we are all, you know, like top of our game people, but I felt like I had a place at the table, and that was really meaningful for me. It was really transformative. It kicked off a really huge year of personal growth for me. And so going back to camp this year, all the entries from that period of time, you can tell I was just dashing off demons that were like, stop having a nice time. This is terrible. I'm having lots of fun without you, whatever. Because I was just so happy. I felt so fulfilled and so encouraged and so proud. And I didn't feel like that demon had any hold over me. And it was hard to draw those entries because I was like, I don't actually have to deal with this right now. And it was great to have that, you know, for like one sweet weekend to think like, dang, that's possible. You know, like that is what it would be like if I did not have that voice all the time. And at the same time, that voice is still a part of me, even if it's saying like, you're leaving me alone and I feel bad. But that's part of it as well. So I did believe it in that moment. Do I believe it all the time? Absolutely not. There are plenty of times where I'm like, oh God, I don't belong here. This is terrible. But I feel like the last couple of years I've maybe crossed a threshold.
Like that, right? Like,
yeah.
What's amazing is when people who, you know, I've been lucky enough to hang out with lots of cartoonists, period, over time, but also people who are my heroes and people who are like, you know, a lot older than me, spending time with them and having them then see me later, you know, some other thing and go like, oh, Jessica. And I'm like, oh my God, actually, I mean,
we're friends.
Yeah, I guess we're friends. I'm like, yeah.
I mean, that was how I felt when you said hi at Mocha. I was like, that's Jessica Abel. Oh my gosh. She knows who I am.
Right, so that's what I'm trying to say too. Like when at the beginning of this, when I was introducing you and I'm talking about how I felt about it, I was like, oh my God, she's just like this pipsqueak, but she's so awesome. Why is she so much more awesome than me? Like that's a, you know, I don't usually do that when I introduce people. I was doing that because of the theme, you know. Normally, that the little voice is going like,
let's just be brutally honest about our feelings.
Head, you know, it doesn't like it. I don't let it out, but it's everybody's got it, and like people, you know, people are all the time treat me like that, like, oh my God, I can't, and then I'll just do that to somebody else. It's like this is one of the things I was going to say, and I think I sort of didn't say when talking a little bit earlier is like one of the things about the way our interactions happen with our community is that it can be easy to forget that there's a person, like a human being on the other side of.
I was just going to say that kind of like, oh my gosh, it's such an honor to meet you. I feel like this is what the XO talk was all about, was I'd had a whole year of people saying that to me and saying, wow, you've had a really successful year, before they asked me how I was feeling, which was drained, exhausted, terrified, sad. Or like what it had actually been like. They just saw the trappings of success on the exterior and thought like, I know what your life is like. It's successful.
Right.
Which, what the heck does that even mean on a universal scale? Like there's no one size fits all.
I mean, on the other hand, there's like there's also the line between like TMI and whatever, but like this.
Yes, exactly.
Of being revealing about, like you talked about, you know, revealing your finances, and we talk about, both of us have talked in very public ways about, you know, ways that we have failed in the past and have tried to do better, and all those kinds of things, and super important. This is one thing you brought up earlier. This is like one thing then the other thing, right? Like one of the ways you can identify like that if your should monster talking is if it's saying like both things at the same time, like telling you both things.
You can't win.
If you go back to this, I know it was on too fast, but if you guys go back, it's actually reprinted in Growing Gills, but if you go back to this crowdcast later and you read the Susan Olding list of shoulds, it's amazing. It's like everything and its opposite. Such a good prose poem.
You should do more, you should do less.
Yeah, exactly. So these two seem to be about like this, you know, basically that there's somebody watching, you know what I mean? That somebody's watching and judging all the time. It reminds me of the Michelle Tavares should monster, which is like that cloud of, you know, people saying like what's acceptable and what's not.
And you're always performing, right? In some way, you're always filling up some kind of standard.
Yeah. And then also here, I was like, you know, there are moments when, and this is something that came up in the last time I ran the Creative Focus workshop, there are times when the shoulds are like, there are times when the shoulds reflect actual things you want to do with your life and you're just not doing them. And so those are like, that's means that you need to put that goal into action. But then there's other times when they reflect like real genuine fears. I think there's another one that I don't think I used it, where you're sitting in a cafe going like, are we ever going to have what those people have? There's people across the street. It's a very poignant piece. And it's a real, like a genuine fear, you know, that's like real fear that's reflective of real things that are actually dangerous, right?
Yes, absolutely. And those voices often, the thing that I kept in mind as I was doing this project and sort of learned more as I went on, I think this is part of that hokey thing of like, oh, you know, the longer you live with characters, the more they start to talk to you and they take on a life of their own. And that, as somebody who hasn't done a lot of long form narrative work before, and this wasn't really continuous long form narrative, but it was exploring a character relationship over 3 months. And it was cool to give myself permission to really explore that at a leisurely pace. I'm generally a sprinter. And in that process, I found that these characters were taking on personalities, and it was like, oh my God, it's happening. This thing that people talk about that I've never really dealt with before. And that interior voice, that should monster, that demon, whatever, wants you to be safe. Like what a lot of these impulses are coming from a place you think of like a helicopter parent or somebody who has your best interests at heart. And I think that was kind of the redeeming characteristic of the demon for me, and continues to be, is that that voice is not somebody who wants to destroy me. It's somebody who thinks they know better than me about how to keep me safe, how to keep me productive, how to keep me whatever. Yeah. And that means that they are coming from a place of good intentions, but are not doing a good job of communicating in a way that feels
one of the
supportive.
I've read on this that I think is really helpful is that there's that these kinds of you're right. It is about fear, and it is about trying to protect you and keep you safe.
Yes.
But our fear impulses, in terms of vulnerability, especially in terms of like putting ourselves out there and doing anything that's
scary. I mean, there's like an entry about jumping off a diving board.
Revealing anything that reflects individuality, anything that reflects any kind of thing that you want to do that's comes strictly from inside you, that is not what somebody else is telling you ought to be doing. All of those feelings are, so we as a human species evolved on the savannah in small tribes where the tribe unity and being at one with your tribe was a matter of life and death, right? And so if you were to decide you wanted to have pink hair and your tribe thought that was taboo and you were exiled from your tribe, that's death, right? Yeah. That's actual literal death. And so all of our fear impulses about revealing ourselves and our feelings about things and whatever are formed by that, I think, prehistoric genetic impulse, and feeling like if I actually put myself out in the arena, I am literally going to die. Like I am going to die. And that's the level. And I think it's different for different people. I mean, I think depending on how, how strong they may feel that more or less strongly. I think you and I probably feel it a little bit less strongly than some other people feel it. But that it's there for everybody.
I feel it pretty strongly.
I mean, I feel it strongly too, but I know from students, there are people who are like literally, they're just stopped by it. They feel it so strongly that they're absolutely stopped by it. But I think the thing.
Yeah, I think I don't feel it creatively because I've done a lot of work to get over it, or I do feel it, but like I move through it. I see it in other areas of my life where it does stop me, or it does develop into like paralyzing fear. And I think that's something to remember, is that this is a conversation and a battle and a process that we move through in all areas of our life constantly. It's like, it's a dialogue, right? It is ongoing. It's not an answer. It's not a thing that you arrive at and say like, okay, we're done. I figured this out. I solved it. It's like therapy, right? Like it's a process that you go through for a long time.
Yeah. And I think the more you can identify,
engaging it in one part of your life allows you to understand it in other parts. Even if you can't overcome it immediately, like it helps.
You never overcome it completely. But I think that the just identifying, saying like, I am not in the savannah. I am not going to die. My lions are not
coming, no lion
like just be really explicit about it. I think that can really.
Well, ask yourself, like, what's the worst thing that can happen? This is one of my favorite things that my mom does, is she is really good about talking me down if I call her in a tizzy, being like, everything is terrible, I can't believe it. And she'll just be the voice of reason and say like, well, look, what's the worst thing that actually happens? If you don't, when I was in college and I was calling her with a fever of 103, being like, I have to read 8 chapters of Seneca before tomorrow. And oh God. And she said like, look, if you don't read the chapter, what happens? And I was like, well, I don't do well on the essay. And she said, and then? And I said, well, I don't get a good grade. She said, and then? I said, I can't go to grad school. I don't know. I guess nothing. I guess it's fine. Like just following that train of questioning of like, and then what? And then what? And then what? Because like,
that's a really good idea.
9 times out of 10, the net result is like, yeah, I guess everything's fine. And I still wake up tomorrow and I'm like not dead.
Yeah.
So I find that really useful. I do that for myself now a lot.
So we're going to run out of time to answer questions if I'm not careful here with all my slides. So I thought this was great. I really love this one that I used for the social media and stuff, because I love the candle burning at both ends, and this idea that like the shoulds, a lot of times the shoulds for me are all about, I should be working more, I should be making more money, I should stop working, I should spend time with my family, like that's my feeling always, is like I'm not gonna like, what's the worst that could happen? The thing doesn't come out. Do I have enough money to pay my mortgage? Yes. Okay. Yeah. But it's really, that's really, for me, it's really hard.
And when it's all you too, when you're running your own business, like I think that it's really easy for me to work myself into states of paranoia about like, I'm not going to hit this deadline. Like, who cares? I set the deadline. I make the rules. Like if I choose to launch my Kickstarter in August instead of July, okay, that's fine. Nobody dies, you know, there are better and worse choices, but there's always variety.
I should have thought that more clearly when I was launching Growing Gills and waited on it. It was like cramming two at the same time. But, you know, as usual, like when you're not thinking clearly, you don't have like this, you know, too much stuff's going on, you can't make the right choices, I think. So this is the one I was talking about earlier.
Which I tried to like, I don't know, it's hard to see in the details, but I was thinking about a lot of different FOMO anxiety stuff of like fear of missing out. And there's all these people, there's like a community of people, there's a lot of families, there's a couple, and they're all embracing in front of a bookstore where there's a signing going on that day. So I was trying to encompass all these overlapping feelings that I've been having of like, are you ever going to, you know, start a family? Are you ever going to have a book that's so successful you can do like a big packed out bookstore signing in another country? Like I just tried to encapsulate all these different fears, but people read into it whatever they were interested in seeing, which I thought was really interesting. Like folks who looked at it said like, oh, I also worry about whether I'm ever going to find a partner. Or like, I also worry about whether I'm going to be able to live in a city, or like, I don't know. People just like saw
like, I also am going to be able to spend money and shop, you know?
Like, I love that. I'm glad that it's modular enough that it suits everybody's needs.
Totally. So this is when I was supposed to get to this like 20 minutes ago and move on to talking about social media more explicitly. But this idea of using this is the thing that I noticed. Like, so I ran in my email list. I wrote to my email list live, meaning I didn't have any pre-programmed stuff. I was just like writing emails about the whole process of putting together my book, Growing Gills, over the winter and early spring. And the response that I got to those emails when I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I can manage this. You know, I'm like having problems here. I don't know if I'm making the right choices. You know, having these thoughts. There's those emails, people would like instantly write me back supportive email. Like it was like bouncing off the wall, you know, like within an hour I have like 10 emails from people saying like, oh my God, it's okay. You know, this is what I think, and here's my perspective on this, and I want to help. And it was so amazing to feel like, you know, my community is, I refer to the people who are in my email group as a community, but they don't really talk to each other very much unless they're here, and then they can, which is awesome. And also in
which they are. I'm really enjoying sneaking in on the chat over here.
Yeah, and various Facebook groups and things they can talk to each other too. Yeah, which is great. I really like that. But I think of it as a community, but really it's like my relationship individually with all those different people, you know?
Yeah, there's Erica Moen, who's a studio mate of mine, who does a great sex ed comic with her partner called Oh Joy Sex Toy. She wrote an amazing post on Patreon about how there's a joke in Zoolander 2, stick with me here, where Hansel, what's his name? Hansel
Hans be a great joke.
Is dating an orgy. He's like in a relationship with a group of people who are just constantly having an orgy. And Erica wrote this post where she was like, look, the quality of the movie notwithstanding, this is a perfect metaphor for being a person who is like making a career of making a living on the internet and being in community with all these people, because you, an individual, are somehow meant to be fulfilling the needs of this like massive entangled nebulous entity, which is like connected to bits of other bits of it in ways that you can't really anticipate or expect or want to investigate too closely. But like it is a confusing mass of people. I'm really enjoying continuing to like bonk the legs of my demon while I talk because I wave my arms a lot. But I really like that stuck in my head because I think it is that nexus idea where like you're the connecting factor. But sometimes I had a live stream that failed to go live a while ago when I was at sea on a tall ship, or not, a research vessel. And what ended up happening is that I was not in the stream, but like 15 of my fans all ended up in a Google Hangout together and then just talked to each other for half an hour while they tried to figure out where the heck I was. And someone sent me screenshots from it, and it was actually really sweet. It was like, oh, these people who maybe have a lot in common are like getting to know each other. And it's something I like about your process is that I see a lot of inter-fan connectivity at work in the spaces that you set up, that you foster. And I think that's a really good idea to give people a place to talk with one another.
One of the nicest things for me with the Creative Focus Workshop has been the nicest thing for sure is the group that I set up a group each time when I run it. So it's like anywhere between like 30 and 80 people in the group. And they get to, like the help that they give each other is like 10 times what I could do, you know? And so it's sort of building that community in that. So, you know, in the last few, I've done it on Slack. And so there's just kind of like constant back and forth. And it's really, it's just been, it's really clear that that's where the value comes from, is from people being able to, you know, come together and support each other.
And you want to give people a safe space. Like, I think a lot of what you're doing is giving people permission, right? That's all we're doing. I think a lot of the time when we seek advice from our friends about, you know, oh, should I launch this Patreon? Like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to put this thing up. I don't know. And I think a lot of the time the underlying query in that is like, do I have permission? Is this okay? Am I going to get in trouble? And when you have a group of people who are saying, hey, this is a good space, like what's happening right now in the chat of like, this is a good space to share your Patreon page, because you know that the people here have the best intentions. It's the reason, likewise, that I write really personal essays. I mean, I'm pretty vulnerable on the internet, but like I discuss hard stuff on Patreon behind a paywall because I know the people who are there probably aren't paying $2 a month for the right to be rude to me when I talk about my feelings.
And if they are, so get rid of them.
Yeah, if they are, I can move them, which I've never had to do because my fans
are that's the thing. People are always like, oh, well, what about trolls and stuff? And I'm like, I mean, knock on wood, but I have never had a troll. Like I have never had anybody.
And a lot of that has to do with where I'm at, right? Like the distinction between my career and the careers of some of my friends who do work that has to do with politics or gender or, you know, like all of these hot button issues. I fully understand that my primary brand, which is I'm really into boats, which I have to expand now to be like, I'm really into boats and also feelings. That doesn't really spark the same kind of like rah, I'm going to dox this jerk because she's saying stuff that I don't agree with. Like, I don't know. I recognize that there's a privilege inherent in being in a corner of the internet that does not get a lot of
hate. But the thing is that most corners of the internet are like that. That, you know, and one of the things I wanted to say, so let me see if I have any more here. Yeah, so I don't really have any more here. I'm going to put these up real quick and then I'll minimize this.
We'll actually get to the questions. Yeah. I know it is late for you, and I also see people being like, go over, keep talking. So if you're game, keep going. I am, but
or something, but it's like 10 o'clock here, so I'm not going to go that.
Yeah, so I know you.
I want everybody, first of all, to take note of this, and Jen, you could pop it in the chat as well. You guys should all definitely check out this Kickstarter. I immediately donated because, or whatever, participated because the video is so effing awesome, so good. And
it's then, like the best money I've ever spent.
2 days later, your video guy writes me an email, and I was like, "Oh my God, hi!"
Oh, because Chris did it right, and he said that he had a really awesome work break because of your stuff, like back in the '90s.
Yeah, no, I mean he's a fan of Radio and Illustrated Guide and Out on the Wire and stuff, and so anyway, it was really funny. So
yeah.
All right, so I'm going to minimize this, but and we'll go back over our data in a few minutes. But what I wanted to say in terms of what you were just talking about, in terms like you're talking about your brand, right? Like, what is your brand?
Yeah.
People in this group right here who are talking. Oh, sorry, chat is over there. I always forget it's the other way around.
Chat.
Yeah. Who are talking right now? Probably when they hear you talking about brand, they're like, right? So there's like a lot of like people feel weird about social media, they feel weird about like branding, they feel weird about marketing and all those sort of stuff. So I actually put in, I don't think anybody saw it, I put a poll in here just for fun.
I do see a little alert down there.
So one person answered it. No, people did it. Oh, also,
lots of people answered.
Lots of people answered. So
oh my gosh,
try to prevent you from doing finishing my work, putting my work out in public, talking about my work.
Look, you can see it changing now that everyone's hopping over there.
Asking people to buy my work, all of the above. I figured most people would say all of the above because, and I shouldn't have even put it in there, but like, what's the number one thing, you know? But I think it's really interesting always to see that even finishing can be really hard for people because just the finishing alone is just a really difficult, it's a commitment to your vision, basically, that makes things really hard for people. But I think what I wanted to talk about is talking about my work with people who may be interested in it. I'm interested that people are not really voting for that much because I actually think that is maybe the number one thing that's the hardest, because what that is, guys, is marketing. And that's
which is funny because I just selected that as my pick because I think I'm at a point in my career now where I'm really comfortable with all the rest of the stuff. And when it comes to this Kickstarter, where like I'm setting my sights higher, now I'm not just like, oh, I'll talk to people on the internet about whatever. I'm in a stage where it's like, okay, I'm going to email this person with an influential blog and put my project in front of them and say like, hey, I would, or like a lot of my friends are hitting points in their careers where they're looking for sponsorship on a bigger level, right? Or they're going after bigger opportunities. And that's really different from just putting something out on Twitter and being like, hey guys, if you like my stuff, like maybe buy my thing. Okay, bye. Versus showing up to a company and saying like, I want to do this expedition. I would like you to give me a grant so I can go with National Geographic and do an embedded comics thing for 6 months. Like that is the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about now. And it terrifies me. I've gotten really good at the other stuff, but like,
it's really tough. But I think that one of the things that's happening with you and happens with all comics people eventually is like you kind of tap out comics. The people who are like comics fans, there's a lot of them, but you know, and I'm sure there's like plenty more who have not yet discovered you and blah, 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 blah. Right. There's a way in which you have to figure out how to get out of whatever bubble you're in. And that's by talking about your work in some way that is going to get to the other people. Who are the other people who haven't found you yet? You know,
and considering like how your interests overlap, like I feel as if most of the success that I've had in my career, I mean, a lot of it does come from comics, from the family that I've built in comics. But I think a lot of it honestly came from being a tall ship sailor who made comics. And then people said like, wow, that's really unique. And people who were into tall ships, but hadn't seen a lot of comics about that, thought that was really neat. I'm actually working on developing a workshop around this right now because I'm about to go to Iceland next week for the Light Great Art Lab art residency. And part of that is we do little like 1 hour, I think, conversational workshops in the evenings. And I'm going to develop it into a talk for Creative Mornings, which is happening in October. So there will be video of this at some point is what I'm saying. And I'll probably have thought about it more by then. But right now I'm trying to develop an exercise sheet that allows people to conveniently visualize where they're, because like, okay, you're a writer or you're an artist or you're a cartoonist, but what else are you super into? Like, what gets you like really hot and bothered? Is it, you know, boats? Is it history? Is it like salamanders? Is it whatever? Can you bring that just for play's sake? Can you bring that into your creative practice and see what happens? Like, can you make up a weird hybrid job title for yourself, like adventure cartoonist, which was not something, again, when you're talking about like brand and marketing, I didn't start 7 years ago and say, okay, this is going to be my brand.
You can't.
I just started doing stuff.
Actually can't.
You can't. You absolutely cannot. Yeah. Or like you can, but it gets slimy.
No, but I think you can't because you don't know how. Like you have to practice. And one of the things about this is something I've heard a couple of people different people say in different contexts lately that is, I think, really wise. That one of the things that's really valuable for all you guys who are in the chat and you're like, oh, I don't know, I don't have fans, I don't know, blah blah. It's super valuable to be where you're at right now because you can practice. You can do,
and people aren't staring at you.
Nobody's looking, you know, or not. Yeah. You know, people who like you already are looking, but you know, there's not that many people looking, and so you can practice talking about what it is that you do and why people should pay attention to your work and why are they interested in your work. And once you start getting that right, you'll feel it when new people can listen to you talk about this thing. And the thing I want to say is, like for you, Lucy, talking about tall ships and stuff, it's like the thing you can say to people and you do really eloquently say to people is like, what I can do for you is I can bring you on adventures that you couldn't go on your own, you know? And for a reader, they go like, yeah, I'm in, like, I want that.
I love adventures.
Right. Whereas if you say like, I got a new book, it's about ships, you know, I don't see my way in. So a lot of the sort of messaging that you have to develop about your work that is really truly about representing what the work really is about thinking about how can I put this in a way where the person listening to me is going to be able to understand what's in it for them, essentially.
And that's also a trial and error thing that happens in community. So for those of you who are cartoonists, if you're tabling at a convention and you have a new mini comic and people come up to your table, you may have heard of the idea of having an elevator pitch, right? Where you need to be able to tell somebody in 1 sentence or less what your thing is. And when I debut a new mini comic, I do not have that. I don't like practice in front of the mirror at home. Maybe I have some idea, but those first couple sales at a show are ugly because I'm like, well, it's the stuff and it's the thing. Look, I have a plushie. Do you want a plushie? Like that's, it's difficult. And I think getting your one-liner down is something that happens organically the more shows you do because you have to practice over and over again and you'll probably fall on your face and whatever, that's fine.
Whatever.
Because eventually,
one sale, you know, that's
like really, you lose one book.
Yeah.
But then you hit on that like sentence, you hit on that thing. And for me, it was realizing that people didn't understand what a tall ship was until I showed them a photograph of the ship that I worked on. So now I have a postcard on my table and I say, oh yeah, I'm a tall ship sailor. I work on big boats like this one. And then their eyes go, bah! And then they buy my book and then everybody's happy. Not always, but you know, a lot of the time. And likewise with adventure cartoonist, it took me 7 years to come up with that. I called myself a cartoonist who goes on adventures like 4 years ago, and that didn't stick. Nobody really liked that. But adventure cartoonist, like that immediately people started introducing me to their friends because they just wanted to be able to say, this is my friend Lucy, she's an adventure cartoonist. I don't know what that job means. It's totally made up. But like, that's why I want to encourage people to play with what they can do. I think you're totally right. Like what you can do outside your chosen field, because that's where the possibility lies.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to quickly go through the top 3 or 4 questions here. We need to be really brief. Okay. So we're going to start answering Maria's question, which is, what's the best way to use social media if you're an introverted creator and large amounts of interaction drain and overwhelm you? My advice
the best part is
would be, you thank your lucky stars, it's social media and you don't actually have to go anywhere and see anybody.
Yeah.
But what I would say is basically figure out what platform feels the most natural to you. What feels like the most, when you're doing it, it's like, feels kind of like you're at home there. You're not forcing yourself to put your, you know, like if Twitter feels just like this, you know, crazy thing, don't go to Twitter, just pick one platform that feels the most at home to you and then get really good at that platform and just do things that work there. Don't worry about the rest of them. You don't have to do them all. Just do one and do it well. If you do one and do well and you're like, okay, I have room for more, then do one more. Don't think you have to do them all.
Absolutely. And it's overwhelming. If you guys watched the talk I gave at the animation workshop, I made the point that I joined all these different social media networks over the course of many years, and I had a chance to adjust to them. Whereas I was asking my students to join all of them concurrently in 2 weeks just to try them all out, which I recognize is very overwhelming. And if you just have one, especially visual artists, you guys are at an advantage here because your work does very well on these different platforms. So if you start an Instagram, which I think is kind of the easiest, right? You take a picture, you put it on the internet, you're done. You can set up. Yeah, you can just put the picture out there. Like, come on, it's easy.
Yeah.
But for some people, I mean, Twitter was my home for a long time. That was the place I felt like I was having the best community engagement, community impact. I enjoyed being there. That may be shifting now. But I think that is a really good advice. And I'm also going to add a link to If This Then That, which is a great automation service. And it helps you take a post on Instagram and then natively post it to other platforms, to Tumblr or Twitter or whatever. And if you are super overwhelmed and you don't want to have to make 8 different posts every time you share something, consider installing a little, it's called an applet on IFTTT, which will send your photograph out to other platforms. And I can talk about that in more depth later, but it's a good thing to check out.
That doing automated posting and things is a really good idea, but I do think basically just focusing on one platform and doing a good job on it, building a following there and building relationships there will be great. So figure out the messaging system and all that other stuff. Just like keep it simple. I don't think, you know, I think that the day of just needing to build giant followings all over the place is over anyway. Yeah. So you were talking about how you feel like there's this move, and I think I'm hearing this everywhere, this move toward more like focused communities as opposed to like just broadcasting stuff. So things like Facebook groups are an example of that.
Yeah.
But you know, I think that more focused kind of environment is probably something that's more comfortable for introverts as well, and probably works as well as anything else.
And make a little check sheet for yourself. I think like I'm a big fan of doing stuff like this, where like you have boxes, right? And you check them off. And just start out by saying like, I'm going to post once a week to Instagram on Mondays, right? And then move it, maybe do that for a month and then move up to 3 times a week. Like under promise and over deliver. I cannot stress that hard enough for overcoming demons in any department. Do not set yourself up for failure. Do something that is so laughably easy that you're like, yeah, but that doesn't count. Like 1 post a month, that's ridiculous. Anybody can do that. Okay, fine. Then be anybody and succeed at it. And then next time, take that momentum and crush your goals. Crush that into a pulp.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Done answering. Next question.
Glad we solved that problem.
So we're gonna start answering James' question, which is, should you start on Patreon even if you don't have a following yet? I don't know. Personally, like I had a Patreon for Out on the Wire. It was sort of it was like, because it was a series, a season rather, it was like I didn't want to have to set up for a Kickstarter beforehand, but then like it ended and then the Patreon, anyway, it was kind of not the right project for it, but there's nothing really in between. I would say if you have no following at all, you may find Patreon a little draining, because you have to post things there. And if you have just like 3 people or something, it's just sort of like, you know, I don't think it would feel really great. And it wouldn't actually like pay back the effort of maintaining it and like creating the video and all the things you need to do to create a good crowdfunding campaign. What do you think?
So I used to counsel people, like I have a lot of creative friends of mine who are making work and putting it out there and have a little bit of a following, but they think like, I don't know if I'm ready to launch a Patreon. To those people, I say, flip and launch your Patreon, because the worst thing that happens is your mom gives you $5 a month and then you've got $5 that you didn't have before. Good job. Patreon is kind of a slow burn growth. When Kickstarter, if you run, you know, if you've got a good Kickstarter, ideally you have a big burst of action in that first couple days. And on Patreon, it was like, I had a burst of action when I launched the page, but that growth has been like $2 to $5 a month, maybe over the last 3 years. And now it's finally at a point where I'm like, paying my bills and my rent and like my food, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
But it's not explosive. It's a process.
And it's a process to build bit by bit. And here's how you build it. So Alyssa's saying, how do we get a following? It's overwhelming. I agree, it can feel overwhelming. This is what I'm saying. Go back to the social media thing. Post something regularly. Post about what you're doing. Figure out how you talk about what it is that you're doing. And build relationships with people based on your work, based on what you can give them via your work. How can you give something to somebody else via your work? When you are able to do that, when you're able to, like, so people are looking forward to your posts, I would really recommend that you have an email list immediately. Like if you have some place for people to sign up and get email from you and you send things out regularly, that's how you build a following. And then when you have people who have decided that they, and this is marketing stuff, know, like, and trust you, the most important things, then when you ask, like, can you support me on Patreon? They're used to getting stuff from you. They feel like they're in a relationship with you and they're ready to give back. But if you just,
same thing with like, same with launching a Kickstarter. I think like there are friends who have said, oh, I've got this great idea for a project. You know, I haven't really done a lot of stuff before, but I want to do a Kickstarter. How do I get people to give me gobs of money right off the bat? And I think the answer is that like promoting my Kickstarter is something that I have been doing 24/7 since I started my career, right? Like that, because it's not just saying like, back my Kickstarter, like people, most of like 98% of the work, I think, is done before you hit launch on the campaign, because you are doing exactly what Jessica's saying, like developing a personality that is available to people online. You're sharing stuff that they find valuable. And the way that I talk about it in that animation workshop talk is that it's a gratitude economy. You give things away for free online, and then you make an ask. You say like, hey, I've shared all these comics for the last 100 days. You guys have really enjoyed them. I really enjoyed putting them up. Would you like to help me make a book? And that gives them an opportunity to say,
I think that you can do more than that. You can say, look, I am doing a book that's really going to be great for you. You're really going to enjoy it. I know why. I know you're going to enjoy it because you've enjoyed all these other things. That's why you're here. And I'm going to be able to deliver more of this to you in this book. That's selling, right? And
yeah, it is. It's true. And I'm not always the strongest like sales person. But I think I do a fairly good job of like creating an environment where people feel like they have a stake in helping with my success.
What I'm trying to say is it doesn't have
that is very true.
Gratitude, but the gratitude is the beginning of it. And it's not even gratitude like, oh my God, I'm so glad you blah, blah, blah. It's like you're building this sense of like, what kind of work do you produce? Did they care about this work? I mean, the problem, the reason it would feel overwhelming is if you feel like you have to get all the way to funding your life via Patreon, like within a month or two. All you need to be thinking about right now is like, what can I share of what I do and what I care about? And how can I talk about it in a way where I can help people go, oh, that's why I care about this. Because things go by so fast, you have to give people some way in. So that's all I would say is like, focus first on just getting a small group of people who are interested in your work, ask them to show to other people, you know, use whatever, use hashtags and things, or maybe you can do trades with people where like you share their thing, they share your thing. You can do different ways to build this up, to build up a following in an organic and slow kind of way. If you want to go faster than that, you can use all kinds of other tools. But I think nailing your, like what it is that you do for people, what it is your work does for people, why they would want this is absolutely the crucial first step before you start spending any money or whatever on trying to find a following. You got to know what it is that you do and why people would want it. Knowing why you
as much for your benefit as it is for theirs, right? Like it's as much for your benefit workshopping what your voice is like online, how you talk about your work. I think that's a great point, that a lot of us, we don't grow up trained to share ourselves in this way, to talk about like what we're doing and why it lights us up. And I think that's a really good exercise for anybody. And I have two things that I'll add to this before we move on, if we need to move on. One is that I highly recommend reading both of Austin Kleon's books, Steal Like an Artist, and more importantly for this conversation, Show Your Work. They are short. I'm looking at them right now. They're right next to my desk because they're exactly the same dimensions as this demon book is going to be. And they are fantastic, brief, digestible, lovely, basically how-to manuals if you are stuck on wanting to share your creative process and you don't know how to do that. Very helpful. Number two, befriending, when you're talking about hashtags and like art trades, I think a really big one if you're starting out finding a following is also to make sure that you're reaching out to people who are on your level. Like I think a lot of newer creators fall into the trap of saying, I am not going to rest until famous person X notices me. And like, that's the sign of success. And that's not actually true. And also if you are in it long enough, this is the comics camp thing, right? I didn't set out in comics saying like, I'm going to be in a room with all these people and then I'll have made it. I'll be a real cartoonist. But it was, I'm going to keep doing my thing and I'm going to keep producing work that I care about. And organically along the way, mysteriously, I started to become friends with more cartoonists and they made friends with other people and I made friends with other people and kept doing work. And then eventually got invited to teach in Denmark, and I only got to go because another cartoonist couldn't make it and they were too busy. And so I got picked and like, I'll take it. That's great. And because of that, Jessica knows who I am. And, you know, it's like this, make sure that you're reaching out to people who are also developing their practice. It's what I love seeing in the chat window is people saying like, yeah, show us your Patreon. This is great. Hey, you could also try this thing. Like that mutual encouragement is gold. Those are the people who are going to get you places. And someone asked that question too, like how
your like pay grade, you know, you can go a little bit higher and try to make friends with people who are
definitely do.
a little bit further
along
than you, but like look 2 or 3 steps ahead, you know?
Yeah. I think that like productive margin of growth, or what's the thing where you're like at the outer limit of your like proximal growth region or something? There's a term for this. Where you're like kind of pushing yourself. And I was thinking about that when we were talking about spending time with and being friends with more established creators. Right. Which you do want to be aspirational. You do want to be pushing yourself.
So I'm gonna call that one answered. And I think Amy Lewis, you asked something very similar, which is how do you get from how do you get from some to more? You know, and I think that's the thing, you know, again, how do you get to some, we were talking from none to some. It's not clear to me whether she wants one or the other there, but basically I think that the question is the same. You know, the answer is the same of what we just said. Is this thing of like trying to just take it one platform at a time, figure out your message, figure out how to talk about what it is that you're doing. Find where are the people who are interested in what you're doing, where are they hanging out? Go there. Like wherever they are, go there and get yourself involved with them as a friend, as a colleague, as a companion.
Yeah, like in the real world, or if that's, you know, if you're an introvert, like maybe in the online communities. But I think that's spot on. Like a lot of my early comics experience wasn't from like going after people and saying like, oh, I want to get more readers and followers. I started a drawing night at my house because I was lonely and I wanted to hang out with other comics people. So people would come to my house every Thursday. I had an open door policy. And after a while, that became an established thing. And I would invite newer creators and they would come and meet other friends and those people would support each other. And like that kind of community building will broaden your circles. And I reread the question. I think it is about how do you go from no followers to some followers?
Yeah.
And I think always, I mean, the solution is like make work and share it. Like,
yeah. And I mean, Amy, I know, is a very talented writer who's been in my group before. And I think that like writing writing things, write some, I don't mean write whole books. I mean like write a little, figure out some funny way to share things like on Instagram and like put a little like, paragraph long short story with them.
Yeah, set yourself a challenge. Do like a 30-day writing challenge.
Right, and share it. Ask people who will help you out to share it to other people. Kind of help push your network out in circles in that way. But again, like looking for places where your people are hanging out and going there, I think is the key. All right, I'm going to call it quits here because it's 20 after 10 p.m. here.
These good questions.
Yeah, so many good questions. And I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but we just had so much good stuff to say. Oh my gosh, Liz, we'll cue this again.
And you guys can always like hit me up on Twitter. It's the worst platform, I guess, for writing long form answers. But I also, I don't know, I can do a like Instagram. I'll tell you what. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. This will be a fun exercise. When we're done here, I will go start an Instagram live video. And if you still have a question that is for Jessica, I can't pretend to be Jessica. I'll just like, Jessica. I cannot speak for her, but if you guys have questions for me, I will hang around for another like 45, and you can ask me questions on Instagram. So
she's awesome. Oh my God. Yes. Okay. So
me, you can go find me on Instagram if you want to talk to me.
End this with a couple just quick things here. So my information, jessicaabel.com, and I'm on Twitter, Facebook at JCCAbel, and on Instagram and Pinterest at Invisible Woman, because somebody has my handle.
Sure.
Yeah, really. And Lucy, you can get Lou Bellwood just about everywhere. Don't forget to check out her Kickstarter. And then one last thing I want to say, I'm just going to say out loud, is I am thinking about planning basically to do a series of workshops, like low-cost paid workshops on audience building, particularly via email, and also figuring out this messaging piece in September. So you guys are all on my email list now that you've signed up for this thing, so you'll find out about it, but I just want to let you know that that's happening, and I hope you will think about joining me for one or more of those. I think it's going to be really, really fun. I haven't done it before, but well, I've done it live with students at my school, but I haven't done it anywhere else, so pretty exciting. Yeah. So thank you so much, Lucy.
We did it. Yeah, this is great. I wish we could keep going, but this is delightful. And it's also been really great to see all of you guys following along in the chat window, talking to each other and encouraging each other. And it, I don't know, people saying like, yay, well, we're going to stay in touch. Like, let's support each other. That makes me really happy. You guys are great.
Yeah. Everybody join together.
Yes, band together. Make a Voltron of awesomeness.
No, it's like the tide rises all boats. What?
Yeah, a rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah.
There you go. That's it.
Perfect. Nailed it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.